This gets me at the word bias, right? It is a word that people love to throw around, and they don't frickin' know the definition of it. Let me tell you something about bias. Let me check my pulse. Okay, I'm a human being. You know what that means? I'm born with original bias. We all are born with original bias. So when this Brendan Carr at the FCC, who has now decided to just blow up the First Amendment and has made CBS state TV. The restrictions that have been put on CBS now make it state television. Okay, more restrictions than we've ever seen an American government put on the media, arguably since World War II, and with government in Hollywood in cahoots to do pro-war propaganda movies. And you can say in hindsight that was done for a good cause, but it was propaganda. And now we have an FCC that is doing this. So Brendan Carr, who's a right-wing conservative, nothing wrong with that. I think the FCC should have a balance. And right now the Republicans won the election, so yes, I get it. They get the chair. But he wants a bias monitor. Well, bias through whose prism? Is CBS, is he going to look out to make sure CBS does a percentage of programming that's communist? A percentage of programming that's fascist? A percentage of programming that's MAGA? A percentage of programming that's progressive? A percentage of programming that is, quote, centrist? That is not, what are his qualifications? You know, whenever I've been accused of bias, it's usually by a partisan. And I always say, like, what gives you, how is it that, and this gets into human nature, which is we all believe we're the moderate, we're right, and everybody else is to the left of us or to the right of us. So I accept the premise that we're all in some ways in our bubbles. And I'll tell you how I dealt with it in a newsroom. I think the single most important diversity you can have in a newsroom is not diversity of looks, it's diversity of geography, and it's diversity of socioeconomic status. And if you told me the FCC was going to put restrictions on CBS that said, hey, we need to make sure that 30% of your hires are within 200 miles east and west of the Mississippi River, I could accept a restriction on that. They're not restricting your editorial content. They're telling you, hey, you need to prioritize having a diversity of people working in your news organization. That's how you deal with bias. It is more speech and more voices, not restrictive speech and restricting voices. And the answer right now by Brendan Carr to what he perceives as a left-wing bias is balance it out with a right-wing bias, and the next government will come in with a left-wing bias, and we're going to be balanced like a seesaw. All that's going to do is make the rest of us sick, right? I am tired of this balance by extremes approach, right? I believe you can be fair. There's no such things as balance. If you try to balance, you can balance anything further and further away from each other. Is that healthy? Does that actually give you a snapshot of what keeps things on an equilibrium? Well, it doesn't, right? That physics would get away from you in a hurry. So, I sit here, I watch what we're doing here. We're in the middle of essentially been hijacked. Our entire news ecosystem been hijacked by this manufactured conspiracy theory based on a whole group of people believing in this larger conspiracy about pedophiliacs running the world. Okay? This is some crazy, messed up shit, folks. And we've mainstreamed it. And now both political parties, whether they believe it or not, are going, hey, we're just asking questions, right? If you put a question mark next to oh, no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just asking questions. I'm not saying Barack Obama put together some sort of dossier to harm President Trump. I'm just wondering if he did. I'm just asking questions and putting it out there, which of course is this garbage stuff that's being circulated that legal scholars left and right are just ripping. I mean, what Ratcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard are doing aren't there. But I get at this because when Brendan Carr announced, and I have to say, I've watched a lot of interviews with Brendan Carr. I've invited him on this show. and I'm still going to keep inviting him to this show. And I think there's a chance he'll come on, because one thing I've noticed about him is that he is willing to talk to people who don't, who have real questions about how he's going about his job. I think on a lot of this stuff, like making sure Paramount invests in local news, I think that's a good restriction to put on it. There are certain things that make sense. And again, I go back. If you wanted to deal with the bias issue, there were different ways to do it that didn't violate the First Amendment and would make it unconstitutional. But what he did here is unconstitutional. It's a violation of the First Amendment. He's imposing never before seen controls on decisions that a news organization makes, and that news organization doesn't then report to anybody with any editorial guidance. They report to a CEO. So it is, and look, he acknowledged that they are not an unbiased force here. In his interview with CNBC on Friday, he said President Trump is fundamentally reshaping the media landscape. And he believes that government officials allowed the public broadcasters, really referring to CBS, ABC, and NBC, and Fox, when they're on their over-the-air network, is also a part of this. He believes they were allowed to dictate political narrative, and now he wants to dictate the political narrative back. Again, what he didn't do is explain what neutrality is. What he didn't do is come in and say, hey, this is the problem. There's too much of an elite narrative from the coast. I think that's a fair critique. It's a constant concern I had. I had employees that worked in different parts of the country, specifically not anchored in LA, San Francisco, New York, or DC. Because I do think it's important for people to experience America outside the coast. Now, these poor big media companies, the news divisions are getting crushed financially by their parent companies. And they're actually now retreating even more. I mean, you're going to have a smaller group of people based in a smaller geographic footprint of New York, DC only, in these major networks because of what they've done, rather than, there was a better way to do this. Hopefully, Mr. Carr will come on and we can have a real conversation. But he apparently does believe the federal government should be able to dictate the editorial content, right? Look, I think we all thought the FCC's job was about decency, right? The things like nudity, the infamous Janet Jackson moment on the Super Bowl halftime show, right? Like that was within the broad strokes of the FCC. If you had equal time provisions, right? If Parks and Rec were, going to put Kamala Harris on, that NBC network would have to give equal time. We had this with SNL, and I think it was maybe Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. I can't remember which one. And then folks got equal time in that sort of similar time slot. This is the quote neutrality and the regulatory touch. By the way, that for you free marketers right there, that's a light regulatory touch versus what the Trump administration wants to do, which is extraordinarily heavy-handed. It is interesting that Brendan Carr said that the news distortion complaint at CBS News is still pending. News distortion complaint. It'd be very interesting to see how that does. He also argued that the media needs a course correction, of which I'd say, welcome to the free market. Guess what the free market is doing? It's giving the entire media industry a course correction. Guess what Fox News was? If you believe there was Fox News created the mythology of this left-leaning broadcast network machine, right? This all goes back to Nixon, in case you're wondering. But they created that myth. Fine. I can accept that they did their thing. Point is, let the market be the market here. But in many ways, you're manipulating the market. You're trying to manipulate the market. And you're picking on news organizations that have far less impact than they used to have anyway, because the free market and free expression in the First Amendment is working. And if you're trying to distort it, you're trying to change it, what you're doing is you're actually harming the very integrity of these news organizations now. And what has been really sad to watch is not a single news division head has pushed back publicly on this. Not a single news division head has come out and reassured the American public and their viewers that they are not state television, that they are not holding back on their reporting out of fear of retribution. And frankly, I think that silence tells you they can't reassure the public. They can't reassure their viewers. They can't reassure their readers. Maybe it's that their bosses won't let them. They all have to report to somebody at a larger media company. Well, I'm sorry. Where are you, Mr. Iger? Where are you, Mr. Roberts? You need to come out. Where are you, Mr. Zasloff, since you still own CNN? You need to come out and say these FCC restrictions on CBS go too far. They're a violation of the First Amendment. And I don't think if CBS, frankly, we know Paramount is going to do this, but I think they could win a First Amendment case here.